Joining us now on the Deseret First Credit Union Hotline is USC football insider for The Athletic, Antonio Morales. I said earlier, I bet he's athletic because he writes for The Athletic. We'll let him decide that. Antonio, are you okay if we introduce you as an athletic writer for The Athletic?
That might be a bit of a stretch, but I'll let you guys run with it.
All right. Okay, that's good. That's out of the way. Then let's go with this. USC and the quarterback position, one of the most heralded positions in all of college football with all of the illustrious history, Carson Palmer, Matt Leinart. Now, is it JT Daniels or will it be Jack Sears for the Trojans?
I'd be very surprised if JT Daniels wasn't starting week one. That's just based off of practice observations and taking into the fact he started all of last year. Just these guys are going to be largely based, like the judgments are going to be largely based on practice, obviously. And he's the most steady practice player. Jack Sears did well in the game he started last year against Arizona State, but he has a lot of highs and lows to his practice performances. And if you're a coach and you're kind of contemplating who's going to start on Saturday and what you're basing them off of kind of right now is practice, I think JT has the edge just because he's the most steady of the quarterback options.
What's the expectation for USC 2 years ago winning the Rose Bowl in the Pac-12 and then last year a dip to 5-7? So what's the expectation going into 2019?
I mean, the expectations kind of range from winning the Pac-12 South to going 6-6 and stuff like that. People really don't seem to have a real good handle on this team. The schedule is really tough. You don't see many teams going out there to BYU, many Power 5 teams, like scheduling a trip to BYU. They have Utah on a short week after that.
Who?
And after that game, they have a game at Washington, then an off week, and a game at Notre Dame. It's a tough first 6 games. We'll find out how good they are early on, and that's not even mentioning Fresno State and Stanford before they get to BYU.
Okay, because of the placement of the BYU game in Provo, are the Cougars a trap game for USC because of the Fresno State game before and a Stanford game right after? What do you think?
Well, Fresno State, Stanford, and then Utah.
And then Utah,
right
sorry,
yeah.
As you said, on the short week. Do you think they're a trap game because of where they're in the schedule?
I think you can consider that a trap game just because Stanford, USC is obviously a contested rivalry now. They're always playing early in the season, and that's a game that's always been circled as pretty important for USC and Stanford. So they're obviously going to have a lot of attention placed on that. Then they go to BYU, and then they have Utah, who's the Pac-12 preseason favorite now, which I think surprised many people. And USC is going to want to get revenge for last year's game where they were embarrassed by Utah. So you're sandwiching BYU in between that. I think you can consider it a trap game.
This group of receivers for USC is very impressive. When I do my receivers preview in what we call 10 and 10, that a lot of these guys are going to be in there. 3 dudes who returned that had at least 670 yards. By the way, BYU had one that had over 500. Amon-Ra, St. Brown, Tyler Vaughns, and Michael Pittman Jr. Are they the best receiver group in the Pac-12?
Yeah. I think people are considering them one of the best receiver groups in the country. I think I would still put them behind Alabama, Clemson, and schools like that. But they're up there. I think they're definitely the best in the Pac-12. Pittman finally started kind of producing. He's always been a big play threat, but last season was his real first season with kind of true production. He's a big yards per catch guy. It's always a lot of big plays. Amon-Ra is steady with the receptions and the yardage. And Tyler Vaughns is a smooth receiver on the outside who can do well in those contested catch situations. So they're each a bit different, but the top 3 make a really good unit, and they've added depth at that position this offseason through recruiting, through the signing, departure, and transfer Brew McCoy. I don't think he'll play this year, but that's good for the long-term view of the position. And them signing a receiver like 4-star Kyle Ford was good for the future of that group too. Once some of these guys leave.
Antonio Morales with us on BYU Sports Nation, writes for The Athletic, covers USC football specifically. You can follow him on Twitter at Antonio C. Morales. Let's talk about the Trojans head coach, Clay Helton. And as Jerem mentioned, coming off of a 5-7 season, but before that went to the Rose Bowl, had a very successful campaign. Mm-hmm. Is he on the hot seat this year, given that he had to change over much of his staff?
I think anytime the AD feels the need to put out a statement saying he's bringing back his coach, I think there's some sort of pressure there. And that's what Lynn Swann did after USC lost to Notre Dame last year and finished 5-7. He mentioned there's deficiencies across the board within the program. And some people said if there's this many deficiencies, why is the head coach coming back? But he elected to retain Clay Helton. I think history suggests that if you hover around 500 or have a losing season as the USC coach, your days as the USC coach aren't going to last that much longer. So we'll see what happens with Clay. Like I said, those first 6 games are obviously a big indicator of how things will go. I know if you're more on the pessimistic side of the USC fan base, they're probably saying, well, this is a team, this is a program that's the last 2 coaches have been fired midseason. If he gets off to a bad start, will he be fired midseason? So we'll see what happens. Those first 6 games are crucial. If they can get through those with a decent record, it sets up well for a nice second half run and for Clay to stabilize things a little bit.
If that happens, at least let him go on the plane ride home this time, unlike the previous incident, right? Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah, I think after they lost to Alabama in 2016, when Kiffin was the offensive coordinator and he was tweeting out the time of when he got fired on the tarmac. I don't know if that'll ever happen again.
It was weird. Let's finish with this. What's your perception of BYU football going into 2019?
I was just looking into it right now. It seems like they were kind of young at quarterback. And some other positions last year. The most I kind of watched of them was when they played Wisconsin. They had that upset win, which at the time was pretty impressive. I think Wisconsin was top 5 team in the country around that time. I'm interested to see how USC will match up in the trenches with BYU, because an area where people usually have doubts about USC these days. When USC was great last decade, the offensive line, they handled things in the trenches, both offensively and defensively. That's kind of dipped and been one of the reasons why they haven't been as dominant. The skill players are still there, but they haven't been as dominant on both sides of the line. So I'm interested to see how they match up with BYU, which is typically a bigger, more physical, and older team, more mature team. In the trenches, I'm interested to see how they kind of match up there and see how USC handles that in that environment.
Antonio, great stuff, man. We appreciate the insight into USC. Thanks for the time.
Oh, no problem. Thanks, guys.
Antonio Morales on the Deseret First Credit Union Hotline. Deseret First, you know why, we show how. He brought it up.
Brought up the age. But lightly. It's fun.
But does he mean maturity just in experience on the offensive line? He didn't say
going
older
on a
players.
mission is
He didn't say older players. He just said maturity.
You're right. Thank you. You're right. Coming up, how does BYU fill Nick Emery's spot? He went on a mission. That was a huge advantage. And the latest on the new hire today on the BYU staff.
But first, how does Zach Wilson compare to the other BYU quarterback greats? We'll find out in just the stats. Is it way too early to do this? Well, too bad. We're doing it.
I had a broadcasting advantage going on a mission. I'm way better because I went on a mission.
This is BYU Sports Nation.